if the Steelers have any hope to get back to being competitive this season, and really they've been in the last few games, but they need to be able to get some wins coming up, especially with the gauntlet coming of opponents in the next few weeks. But here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, if they're going to do that, they need the defense to get back to playing great, not just good, but great. How do they do that? We talk about the key element of that on today's Locked On Steelers episode. Also, our week 3 grades, now that we're back from the weekend. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please hit the like button of this video if you enjoyed. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. All right, everyone, it's Monday. We're back. You had the long weekend to lick your wounds. So now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. We'll talk about Mitch Trubisky at some point. And that Canada and the offense and Deontay Johnson and all the things that you want to complain about there. But we got to talk about this defense because, yes, the offense is a mess and needs to clean a lot of things up. But this team was always supposed to win with great defense. Not good defense, but great defense. And I know immediately some people are always probably hearing that and saying, well, Chris, well, they don't have TJ Watt. That takes away a lot of great. And it does. They still haven't won a game in the last 2 years without TJ Watt starting on the field, well, playing the complete game. So you're a little worried about that, and I get that. But there are still things that I think they can clean up that will make them a more competitive defense and closer to great. I'm not sure if they can be like truly elite without TJ Watt this year, but there are a lot of things that they're getting hurt by. When I went back and looked at the All-22 and looked at the film on defense, and there are things that if they fix up certain parts of it, it'll help a lot of the players who were playing well and helping that defense look better in the first game and a half of the season, and help them get to the point that they need to be. So I'm looking at the All-22 film all weekend long, and I talked about this a little bit, but obviously the run defense was tired, and Cam Heyward even said this, over the weekend. He talked about how like, hey, one thing that needs to be helped is that we have to be able to, we can't be on the field for 80 snaps a game. And I think right now the Steelers are like close to 240 snaps in 3 games. That's close to 80 snaps a game. It's ridiculous. You can't live that way. It's going to hurt you at the end of a game. It's going to hurt you the next week. It's definitely going to hurt you over a span of 3 weeks. And this may be the blessing in disguise for the Steelers to have the long weekend. They didn't have to really do too much Friday and Saturday. They could kind of rest their bodies and get back to going. But what won them the Bengals game, and I know some people say, well, one of them is the backup long snapper, and I'm like, okay, get over yourselves. TJ Watt was also gone, and you didn't see the Steelers complain. They still were able to get the win. But if you look at what won them that game, it was because across the board, not just TJ Watt, everyone was aggressive, and they were detailed in their aggression. And then that is what was winning so much. That's why Joe Mixon, he had some good pops here and there, but by and large, he was ineffective. He wasn't the dominating force. And I said that was the key to that game. That's the key to a lot of games for the Steelers this year. Unless they're playing Josh Allen, which they will be shown, they're going to play a lot of quarterbacks that if they take away the run, if they make things one-dimensional, if they take away the things, how teams like to build their balance on offense, it's going to allow that pass rush to get there a little bit more. I also think that pass rush will be a little bit more aggressive and better detailed once they aren't as tired. What makes them so good is that they keep coming at you relentlessly all game long. And we'll get to my week 3 grades in just a bit here, but they haven't been able to do that. Now, we did see Alex Highsmith get a sack and a half in this game. He's got 4.5, coming into 3. And that's a great pace for him to be at. I've said all summer long, all off season long, since they ended last year, this is his breakout year. I think that he's in the middle of that, but you need Cam Heyward to fire up, and Cam Heyward can't be Cam Heyward at 32, 33 years old, when he's playing 80, when the defense is out there all the time, even Miles Jack was extremely aggressive in the first game against the Bengals and even the first half against the Patriots. But when you go back and watch the All-22, he's a little slower to the hole. He's hesitating a little bit more. And I think it's because he's tired. And when you're tired, you can try to put your best effort out there, but you're going to think slower. You're going to make more mistakes. You're going to look at things the wrong way. And then you're going to try to compensate with that by doing the wrong thing. So that's part of what this is. And the more and more I looked at it, the passes over the middle that that Jacoby was able to hit against for the Browns, a lot of them were because the linebackers and everyone, they kind of had to compensate because they're too worried about the run. They're not able to play at their comfort level. They're also giving up more and more runs that make it short down in distances on those downs, and it puts it at a disadvantage. It's honestly, again, it's not something special that the Browns did. It's the same sort of offense they had when Baker Mayfield was there and when he was able to find success. If you couldn't stop the run, then you were going to be in a lot of trouble, because then they were going to be able to run their slants, they're going to be able to run their crossers, they're going to be able to run play action, RPOs, and that's how they built their chemistry. And I guarantee you the Jets might go for a similar thing. Zach Wilson is reportedly going to be back this week. We'll see how that plays out, but they said he will be medically cleared to play. We'll see how the Jets look, but best believe if any offense sees that on tape, they're going to go for it. They're going to say, hey, you know what, that Steelers defense, even without TJ Watt, they still have Cam Heyward, they still have Minka Fitzpatrick. Alex Highsmith does get after the quarterback. You got to neutralize those guys. So how do you neutralize those guys? Run the ball, attack their weaknesses, and go and see if you can do the things that are going to spark problems over the middle part of the field where they were being attacked. And again, I think a lot of that, we could talk about some miscommunication breakdowns. And again, the miscommunications from Terrell Edmonds, when we're looking in the back of the end zone, especially the first touchdown. I think the second touchdown was legitimately just on Edmonds, but there was definitely, he thought help was coming. Now, it's tough to tell. That might have been a him thing. That might have been a somebody else thing. But either way, those communication breakdowns, those didn't happen before. Against the Bengals, they were very communicative. They were making sure everyone, hey, we're on the same page. Even against the Patriots, the one deep ball that Mac Jones hit to Nelson Aguilar over Keller Witherspoon. Witherspoon wasn't wrong about where he was supposed to be. He was in the right spot, but he got out jumped, and that happens. Again, he's not when you came into the season, he's not a pure CB1, and we'll get to that in the grades segment because that's going to be a big part of it. But you're going to minimize the amount of effort, the amount of things that you have to put on those cornerbacks. You're going to allow them to play more aggressive. You're going to allow everyone else to play more aggressive when you're more detailed and aggressive against the run. You're going to take away the things that teams like to do to try to trick you and get you out of your element. And also, you're going to force quarterbacks to hold on to the ball longer, and that's going to allow those pass rushers to get home. And this is a defense where the pass rush does have to get home. And again, there were sometimes the coverage was there initially, especially when you saw the All-22. There were times where the coverage was there for a bit, and then the pass rush didn't get loose, and it allowed the quarterback to sit there, say bang, and say, okay, I'll wait for someone to break open, and eventually they did. Very few teams can cover forever in the NFL. In fact, I'd say no teams can do that, even if you have Xavier Howard and a billion superstar Jalen Ramsey and all these other guys out there. But again, I think that if they get that basic tenet done, they get the defense to get back to stopping the run and aggressively. It wasn't just aggressive. It wasn't just, we're just firing off. They were firing into the right holes, communicating, feeding off of each other, those type of things. And some of that takes time too. Larry Ogunjobi, I brought this up on Twitter, after the game. People were like, how do you grade Ogunjobi? We'll get to that grade in a bit, but part of it is going to be chemistry. Part of it's going to be timing. Part of it's going to be experience with his fellow defensive linemen. We'll get to that in the grade segment here in just a bit on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about BetterHelp. Now, BetterHelp is one of our great sponsors, and they're one that I recommend to everyone because when life is full of twists and turns, it's important to show up for yourself throughout all of that. And BetterHelp offers online therapy that will assess your needs and can match you up with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. Talk about your personal experience with BetterHelp or with therapy in general. when you're going through BetterHelp and you're going through the things, you're going to see a lot of different options out there. It's not just a crisis line. It's not just self-help. It's actual professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. With therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you, but BetterHelp makes it easy and free to change therapists if needed. And they have a special offer for our listeners. You can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. We're continuing to talk about what the Steelers need to do better because they've had the long weekend. Now they get to focus for a little bit. Let's dive into some of these grades. Now, I want to go over, as you guys remember, when we do grades here, if you're new to the show, we can explain. We have a simple rubric. It's not A, B, C, D, E. It's not anything like that. We're going to do it a little different, and it's with decals, or so as we say, you get a star decal on your helmet for a good play, a skull decal on your helmet for a bad play, and the more stars, the better. For example, 3 stars means you had an elite performance on the day. 2 stars means you had a great play / a good day. 1 star means you just had a good play and a decent day. And vice versa. 1 skull means you had a bad play without any really redemption to kind of make up for it. 2 skulls means you had a bad game as a whole. 3 skulls means you were all-time terrible. Like they should probably bench you the way that Kendrick Green has not been active the past 3 weeks of the Steelers season. So that being said, that's the grading rubric. There are no 3 skulls. We'll get into that in a second. There also are no 3 stars or 2 stars. So we'll get into who the guys I gave the 2 skull grades to, and that was 2 guys specifically in the secondary. And that was Terrell Edmunds and Keller Witherspoon. Now, of course, Terrell Edmonds gave up 2 touchdowns. Again, the first one might have been a miscommunication, might have been help, but the second one, he needed to be there. He needed to establish inside leverage, and he just didn't. And it looked like the Browns were poking at him. You can't let that happen there. And the reason I didn't say give him a 3 skull game, because I've seen some really bad games from safeties, and after this point, they really never went back after him. He was in position a lot more. He did help a lot better. So if he had one more really bad play, he would have been on the 3 skull list, but he was definitely on the 2 skull list after that happened, especially because of those 2 plays. Because again, you take either one of those touchdowns away, you force a field goal there, maybe the Steelers have a chance in this game, maybe. But you can't. The way that he played, you need him to play well. He had a really good game against the Patriots. He was really helpful in keeping things in check there, and for him to drop down like that was disappointing. The other guy is Ahkello Witherspoon, and this is going to be a little concerning for Ahkello Witherspoon because he was a bit mercurial, in San Francisco and in Seattle, and there were times he could look really good and times he could look really bad, and he looked really bad on Thursday night. Now, granted, some of those plays were times when the passing play just took a lot longer and he wasn't able to stick with these guys. But some of those plays were also him just being beat. And, you're not asking for him to be a lockdown corner, but be a solid corner. Don't let Jarvis Landry, Amari Cooper. I just kind of plug in Amari Cooper and Jarvis Landry for the same guy for the Browns. But Amari Cooper, you can't let him crush you. And it's okay if he's better than you, but he was killing him in key spots in this game. And again, Ahkello Witherspoon, to me, in this situation, that's why he gets 2 skulls. It wasn't just one play; it was more than a couple plays. He was consistently a guy that the Steelers were lining up, trusting him to kind of at least handle his business, make the quarterback look the other way, and he wasn't able to do that. So it's getting to be concerning. Now, what I think will be really interesting for Ahkello Witherspoon, how does he deal with this, mentally? How does he handle this? How does he attack his next few games? Because he also might be tired too. Him and Terrell Edmonds, Cam Sutton, and Minkah Fitzpatrick had the most snaps in the NFL going into this weekend. And this game did not help that. So maybe there's a bit of exhaustion there too, but he has to get back out there and get back to playing the way he did in the first game. He was solid, even with Jamar Chase kind of beating him a bunch. He was at least in the conversation with a lot of those passes. You didn't see that as much in this game against the Browns. So now let's get to the 1 skull grades. And we got quite a few of these 1 skull grades here. Now, if you're reading the list, we have if you're listening, excuse me, but if you're not able to see this on YouTube, if you're listening on one of our audio platforms, I've got listed Myles Jack, Mitch Trubisky, Deontay Johnson, Malik Reed, Cameron Sutton, Larry Ogunjobi, Tyson Alualu, and Chris Wormley. Now, for those probably thinking, Chris, shouldn't Mitch Trubisky be a heavier one? You looking back to the film, I think he missed a lot of reads, but he also didn't crush the team with crazy turnovers that did it. And again, I think that's more of his role. But and like on some of those plays that he misreads, they were opportunities for there were opportunities for guys there that he just didn't see. And I'm not grading on a curve for Mitch Trubisky, but I am understanding that like his role is limited in this game, in his offense. And part of it's because they know that he's not the future franchise quarterback. He is the bridge. They recognize that. Now, is there a bit of I think of a mistake on the Steelers' part to not let him do things like call the audible? Yeah, I think that's a problem. But still, there were plenty of plays where wide open wide receivers were to be had, and he just didn't get it to him, didn't even see him. There were plays where George Pickens, ran a curl route, that was wide open, and he would throw it into triple coverage underneath. And it's just like, man, like, we're not asking you to chuck it into, down the field just to chuck it down the field. We're just asking you to take what the defense gives you. And if he can't do that part, that is what's going to kill this Steelers offense all throughout the game. I only listed Deontay Johnson here because I felt like his drop was crucial in this game. And I felt like there were times he could have made things easier for Mitch Trubisky. There was a time when Mitch Trubisky should have hit him with the ball when he was wide open. And I will say Denzel Ward made a heck of a play on this play where he put his hand out, kind of slapped Deontay Johnson's one of his hands a little bit. But that was a play where Deontay Johnson, you're the number one receiver. You were paid to be the number one receiver. That's the play where if you pull that in, you really help out your team. And so again, I'm not putting this all on Mitch Trubisky, but I am saying if you're going to look at what the biggest problem for why this offense can't go, he is it. Now, again, there's problems with Matt Canada. There's play calls I don't like from him. There's drops from Deontay Johnson. There were drops from Pat Freiermuth earlier in the season. There's not a lot of consistency, and those are problems across the board. But if you look at this list, you'll notice most of the rest of my skulls were all defensive. Because again, I said Myles Jack because he had some missed tackles in this game. Malik Reed, the backup linebacker who filled in for TJ Watt, Cam Sutton, Larry Ogunjobi, Tyson Alualu, and Chris Wormley. Now you're probably thinking, okay, wait a second, you're putting a lot of defensive linemen up there. And I am, because these were the guys that were supposed to kind of help things out here. They were supposed to kind of change the run defense. And the more and more I looked at this game, Myles Jack was he wasn't terrible, but he wasn't as great. And you saw I think you saw a bit of that exhaustion creep into his problems there as well. But the biggest problem in the run defense was that the defensive line was getting blown off the ball. Last year, I think a lot of it was the combination. The defensive line got blown off the ball and the linebackers were out of place. The linebackers, a couple times, maybe you could say that, but by and large, I thought that in general, the Steelers linebackers weren't the biggest problem in the run defense. There were sometimes they were. Myles Jack didn't hit a hole right. He missed an opportunity, missed a tackle. That was a problem. But when I look back at this game, I say, man, a lot of this is Larry Ogunjobi. He did have a nice sack early in the game. You were excited about that he split that with Alex Highsmith. But you look at it, you're supposed to handle the run defense better than that. Tyson Alualu, his second straight bad game in my book here. When I look at the Steelers, when I was looking back at it, he was not controlling his point. And again, Tyson Alualu is old. You can't depend on him too much. He's older than Cam Heyward. He's he's the eldest guy on the team now. He's gonna have those problems, but you need him to be strong at the point of attack. You don't need him to make plays out in space. But plug up space, plug up gaps, and be gap responsible. I don't feel like he was that when I watched this game, and that to me is the biggest problem that the Steelers faced. Because man, if they let up runs up the gaps that like they did in this game, if Nick Chubb, and granted that was the best rushing offense in the NFL statistically this week, but again, that's what they were hoping would be different this year. And Chris Wormley, when I look back at it, he also had some struggles there. Now, again, I look at all these grades and I think, man, there were some chances for guys to make some opportunities. It wasn't like it was completely hopeless. I do feel like they were guys that were in position, but they just didn't have the same fire. They weren't firing off the ball the same way that I saw them do so. Back against the Bengals, and even again the first week against the first half, against the Patriots, because I felt like they were better there. So all that being said, you look at this across the board. These weren't destructive performances. These weren't like unforgivable performances by these guys. These were just, hey, you guys got to be better. And I think I'm willing to give this run defense a mulligan so long as they're being gassed. But let me tell you something. If they come out and this run defense is getting gashed by the New York Jets next week, that is going to be a big bad sign, because they've had their rest, they had their chance to recuperate. They need to get it together. And if that happens again, it might just mean, hey, you know what, this defense can't operate with TJ Watt, and that could be a big death knell to the season for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But there were some good players in this game. We'll get to who those good players were in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We finish up our grades right after this. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing our Week 3 grades of your Pittsburgh Steelers. As we went before, remember there's stars and skulls. If you wanted to look at our rubric again, if you're on YouTube, your grades, you have 3 stars, 2 stars, and 1 stars, 1 skulls, 2 skulls, and 3 skulls. We had 2 skulls in Terrell Edmonds and Keller Witherspoon. We had 8 1 skull players in Miles Jack, Trubisky, Deontay Johnson, Malik Reed, Cameron Sutton, Larry Ogunjobi, Tyson Alualu, and Chris Wormley. But where were the 1-star guys? And the 1-star guys paint an interesting picture when I looked back and I was watching this game, because a lot of the 1-star guys are from a group that a lot of people were saying weren't going to be good this year, and that was the offensive line. If you're watching on YouTube, I just put the names up here, but I'm going to read through these names and I'm going to go back over them in a minute here for the audio listeners. So our 1-star guys that I had grades for: Kevin Dotson, George Pickens, Chukwuma Okorafor, Naji Harris, Jalen Warren, Alex Highsmith, Dan Moore Jr., Mason Cole, and Devin Bush. Now, I just listed every offensive lineman except James Daniels on this list, and that's for a reason. I feel like James Daniels, he was better in this game than he was the game before, but he wasn't the dominating force, and there were times I really felt like those other guys really handled their business. I thought Chukwuma Okorafor was a bit of a bully. So I thought that was a good thing. Also, if you listen to the North Shore Drive podcast that we do with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I was doing it with Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for the Friday episode. He went over how there was like not a near fight, but a yelling match in the press box because some Browns staffers thought that Chukwuma Okorafor laying on Anthony Walker, the Browns linebacker that got hurt, was a dirty play. Let me tell you right now, that's not dirty. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. When a player falls down, you lay on them to make sure that they don't get back up and they can't come after any of your guys. Now, if he had like dropped an elbow on him, that'd be different, but that's not what Chukwuma Okorafor did. You could slow it down and make it look like, oh, he like leapt up into the air. No, Chukwuma Okorafor is just a big man. When he falls down, it's gonna look a bit different. So Chukwuma Okorafor wasn't a dirty play, just part of football. And the guy got hurt before then, and he was just making sure, hey, I'm not letting him get up. I don't know if I blocked him the wrong way. That's exactly the reaction you're supposed to have. So that's not what happened. But anyways, Chukwuma Okorafor, I thought he was physical. He did well in pass protection. As far as the offensive lineman, Mason Cole, I thought he's handling the center position well. He's not dominating. He's not Marquise Pouncey in his prime, but he's solid. And I think that's really what you need out of him right now, because because again, you're looking at this team and you're saying like, hey, you didn't invest a whole lot in this offensive line, but you need them to get better. And remember all the people that I was arguing with back in the preseason. A lot of people say, fire Pat Meyer, get him out of there, bring back Mike Munchak. And I was like, man, can y'all let the guy get more than a few preseason games to show if there's some progress? And let me tell you, the All-22, the film, even if you just watch the broadcast, there's progress with this offensive line. They're run blocking better. They're picking up pass rushers better. They're doing a good job. Also, Jalen Warren, good in pass protection. That's why he got a start in this game. He also had a couple good plays. Needed to not fumble in that one play, but he was bailed out by Deontay Johnson's awareness there. But again, across the board, Kevin Dotson, I liked it. Dan Moore Jr., Myles Garrett wasn't a factor, and part of that was the Steelers scheming. They were getting the ball out quick. They were trying to keep the play away from Myles Garrett's side, but Dan Moore Jr. also didn't let him eat him up. There's games like last year where Dan Moore Jr. the Steelers still schemed to get Myles Garrett away from him, but this game, they did a good job of also kind of just making sure, like, hey, we're gonna make sure we need to let you be able to win some one-on-ones out there, and he did. And Myles Garrett, not a factor in this game as much as the Browns, need him to be. And if you're the Steelers, that's a small moral victory that you can keep note of and be like, hey, you know what? Maybe you can actually hold that down out there. My other one-star guys, Naji Harris. I mean, I thought he ran hard. You saw the touchdown run that he had. I think they got to find ways to get him more touches. And I think that this offense in the Patriots game, that one offensive drive where they kicked it into a high gear, was because they started getting the ball to Naji Harris out in space. Find ways to let him be a playmaker. I don't think they've done that enough this year. I think their entire season could change if they are able to do that more. And again, part of it's creativity, part of it's, is opening up the passing game to settle that down. But again, other guys here, Alex Highsmith, I mean, a sack and a half. I didn't see him as big of a run liability as other players. So that's why I gave him a 1-star performance here. Not a 2-star performance because he didn't dominate, but I gave him the 1-star there. But I will say Devin Bush deserves his 1-star in this game. Miles Jack looked slow at times and tough getting to the hole, and he looked exhausted. Devin Bush didn't look slow. He didn't look exhausted. He was meeting guys in the gaps, attacking, being physical, and he looked like the Devin Bush that you drafted him to be. Now, granted, he didn't make the game-changing plays, but there were times Kareem Hunt was meeting him in the hole one-on-one, and Devin Bush was stuffing him. And I thought that was the aggression you want to see. That's the sized up part of him that you want to see. So I give him a 1-star grade. Again, nobody earns a 2-star for the day. Also, George Pickens, I mean, that one-handed catch was amazing. But as you remember in our rubric, you get 1 star for a good play. You get 2 stars if you combine that a good play or a great play with a really good day. And unfortunately for George Pickens, he just didn't get targeted enough to have that good day. And I think part of that, again, comes down to why Mitch Trubisky got a skull in this game, because, I don't think he crushed them all by himself, but he's a big cog in what's going wrong for this Steelers offense. George Pickens is open. Deontay Johnson is open. Chase Claypool's open. Pat Fryman's open. And he keeps going to the wrong guys. And again, that tells me whenever you're talking about Matt Canada, yeah, there's plays that I think that he calls that I'm like, I wouldn't have gone this way. There's relationships I think he needs to help bridge a little bit better as a coordinator. But by and large, when you're a coordinator and you call plays and there's open receivers, unless it's a rookie quarterback like Kenny Pickett who's still adjusting to the NFL, the quarterback needs to make those reads. Mitch Trubisky's a 6-year guy. He needs to be able to see the basics and do the basics, as a quarterback. And someone say, well, if he's not doing the basics, then isn't that a coaching problem? Listen, let me tell you, as a person who had a dad as a coach, you can teach someone a million times the basics. And if they just don't do it, that doesn't mean that you're a bad coach. Sometimes you just have bad players. Chuck Noll couldn't teach these guys the basics when he first got to the Steelers and said, we got to get rid of it. I'm not going to lie about you guys. It's not this, it's not that. You guys just stink. And most of you guys will be gone by the time this franchise gets good. And he was absolutely right, because only a couple of those guys made it to the Steelers Super Bowl roster. So point being, I think a big part of the problem there is the basics aren't being done, and no matter how much they're being coached. So we'll see if they develop. But the thing that's holding up for this offensive line is even better than I anticipated them to be at this point of the season. Their run blocking isn't great, but they're getting sharper there. Their pass blocking, I think, has actually been very good for what it's been asked to do, to buy time for Mitch Trubisky. I think that they're getting along, and that might also encourage the Steelers to put in Kenny Pickett earlier, because now they're thinking, hey, you know what? If they are protecting the quarterback a bit better, then maybe it just means that maybe Kenny Pickett won't get destroyed by this team, and if you can risk putting him out there. But we got a long way before that happens. The Steelers, Mike Tomlin was very clear the Steelers wouldn't do that against the New York Jets, so it's going to be Mitch Trubisky again. We're going to talk about what Mitch Trubisky needs to do moving forward. What else can be done to help him? Whether it's coaching, whether it's receivers, whether it's tight ends, whether it's anyone else. But it's clear the Steelers need to find some way to be able to get balance back on this team. They cannot have, even if the offense isn't putting up a significant more amount of points, the less 3 and outs would be huge for this defense, to get them less time on the field, more rest on the sidelines, more time to kind of recuperate and say, hey, okay, let's attack this way. Let's focus on it. Because I'm telling you, the amount of times they're being asked to go out there, you start to get punch drunk with how many times you're asked to make a big play or make a solid defensive scheme and execute a solid defensive scheme. We're going to see if that changes all throughout this week. We'll have great guests on all week long talking more about it. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Follow this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you watch this video on YouTube, please hit the like button on this video if you enjoyed. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. If you want to help us out, go on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review with a positive comment. Do both at the same time, and you get a special shout out at the end of the show. Thanks again for listening to the Monday episode of Locked On Steelers. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Back on your screens and in your ears very soon to talk about this upcoming Tuesday episode. We're going to be breaking things down even more.